Napoleon Bonaparte was born on the island of Corsica in the summer of 1769. The island had just become part of France, and the people were still unsure of their future. His family was poor but proud, and his parents believed that education could lift their children higher than their birth. Napoleon was small, thin, and quiet, with sharp eyes that watched everything. From a young age he felt different from other children, and he learned early to stand alone. As a boy, he was sent far from home to study in France. He spoke French with a heavy accent and was mocked by other students who came from richer families. Napoleon did not fight them with his fists. He fought them with patience and memory. He read books about ancient heroes, great battles, and lost empires. While others played, he studied maps and imagined armies moving across them. He believed that discipline could turn weakness into strength. At military school, he learned mathematics, artillery, and command. Cannons fascinated him because they followed clear rules and rewarded clear thinking. He was not the tallest or strongest cadet, but his teachers noticed his focus and speed of thought. When his father died, Napoleon returned home carrying responsibility instead of comfort. He finished his studies quickly and became a junior officer in the French army at a very young age. France at that time was breaking apart. The king had fallen, the old order was gone, and new ideas filled the streets. Power shifted daily, and violence became common. For Napoleon, chaos was not frightening. It was an opening. He believed that order could be built by those bold enough to act. While older officers hesitated, he moved. His first real chance came during a rebellion in the city of Toulon. Foreign forces supported the rebels, and the city resisted the revolutionary army. Napoleon was placed in charge of artillery. He studied the land, placed the cannons carefully, and attacked with precision. The city fell, and the victory carried his name to Paris. At only 24 years old, he was promoted to general. Fame arrived quickly, but stability did not. Politics were dangerous, and alliances changed without warning. Napoleon was arrested for a short time and released just as suddenly. He had no powerful family to protect him, only his reputation and his belief in himself. He waited, watched, and prepared. Another uprising threatened the government in Paris. Mobs marched through the streets, and fear spread among the leaders. Napoleon was called to defend the city. He did not hesitate. He ordered cannon fire against the attackers and crushed the revolt in hours. The decision was brutal and effective. From that moment, he became the man the government relied on when everything was at risk. Soon after, he was given command of the French army in Italy. The soldiers were hungry, unpaid, and poorly supplied. Napoleon stood before them and spoke plainly. He promised glory, land, and victory. He told them that courage could feed them better than fear. The army followed him because he shared their hardships and moved faster than their enemies expected. In Italy, he faced larger armies led by experienced generals. Napoleon attacked with speed and surprise, dividing enemy forces and defeating them one by one. His victories shocked Europe. Cities opened their gates, and kings demanded peace. He sent money and art back to France, and his name became a symbol of success. During this time, he married Josephine, a woman older than him, charming and well-connected. He loved her deeply, though their relationship was never calm. Letters from the battlefield showed a man torn between ambition and desire. Still, war always came first. By the time he returned to France, Napoleon was more than a general. He was a hero to the people and a problem for politicians. He saw weakness in the government and believed France needed strong leadership. Quietly, he began to plan his next move, knowing that his greatest battles were still ahead. He dreamed of carving his name into history, not just winning battles but shaping nations. He studied past empires and believed France could stand above them all. The sea called to him as a path to greater reach, and he looked south toward Egypt, a land of old kings and symbols. By striking there, he hoped to weaken his enemies and lift his own legend. The expedition was risky, but Napoleon hid doubt behind confidence. He sailed with soldiers, scholars, and engineers, promising them discovery as well as conquest. When they landed, the desert heat tested their will, Yet he spoke of destiny and science, of future glory written in stone and memory. At the Battle of the Pyramids, he faced armies that trusted tradition more than change. His men formed tight squares, cannons roared, and victory followed his design. Though he won on land, the sea betrayed him. His fleet was destroyed, cutting him off from France. Isolated, he ruled Egypt like a governor and a king, passing laws and gathering knowledge, while news from Europe arrived slowly. He learned that France was again unstable, that leaders were failing, and that people longed for strength. Napoleon chose to leave his army and return home, slipping past enemies and storms. He arrived in France not as a deserter in the public eye, but as a savior. Crowds remembered his victories and ignored his risks. Politicians sought his support, believing they could control him. Instead, he watched them closely, measuring their fear and ambition. Power, he understood, was taken in quiet rooms as much as on open fields. As the year turned, Napoleon stood at the edge of authority, calm and determined, ready to step from general into ruler, carrying the weight of his past and the hunger of his future. The path ahead promised crowns, wars, and sacrifice, and he accepted it fully, believing his will could bend history itself. Nothing in his life would ever remain small. Napoleon returned to France at a moment when the nation was tired of disorder. The government was weak, divided, and unable to control the country. People wanted safety, food, and pride. Soldiers wanted leadership. Politicians wanted survival. Napoleon understood all of this, and he moved carefully, speaking little and listening much. He presented himself not as a tyrant, but as a man of action who could restore order. In 1799, with the support of key allies, he took part in a sudden change of power. The government was pushed aside, and a new system was formed. Napoleon became first consul, the most powerful man in France. Though others held titles, real authority rested with him. He worked endlessly, sleeping little, reading reports, giving orders, shaping the state around his vision. His first goal was stability. He reformed the economy, fixed taxes, and made peace with internal enemies. Churches reopened, laws became clear, and officials were chosen for skill rather than birth. One of his greatest achievements was a new set of laws that treated citizens equally under the state. These laws were simple, strong, and long-lasting. Even enemies admitted their value. But peace in France did not mean peace in Europe. Other nations feared his rise and formed alliances to stop him. Napoleon responded the way he knew best, through war. He reorganized the army, promoted talent, and demanded loyalty. His soldiers trusted him because he marched with them, shared danger, and rewarded courage. In battle he was fast and unpredictable. He studied terrain, weather, and enemy habits. He struck suddenly, forcing opponents to react instead of plan. Victory followed victory. At Marengo, Austerlitz, and other fields, he defeated armies larger than his own. His name became feared across the continent. In 1804, Napoleon took another step. He crowned himself Emperor of the French. He did not wait for approval from church or nobility. He placed the crown on his own head, sending a clear message that his power came from himself and the people, not tradition. France was now an empire, and he was its center. As emperor, he reshaped Europe. He placed family members on thrones, redrew borders, and demanded loyalty from conquered lands. Roads were built, schools opened, and administrations copied French models. To many, he was a bringer of order. To others, an occupier. His greatest enemy was Britain, protected by the sea. Unable to defeat it directly, Napoleon tried to weaken it through trade bans, ordering Europe to stop buying British goods. This policy hurt both sides and created resentment among allies forced to obey. War spread wider. In Spain, resistance turned brutal. What Napoleon expected to be a quick victory became a long struggle. Guerrilla fighters attacked supply lines, and British forces joined the fight. The conflict drained men and resources and showed that not all battles could be won by speed and discipline alone. At home, Napoleon faced another problem. He had no heir. His marriage to Josephine brought love but no child. Believing the empire needed a future, he divorced her, a decision that caused deep pain. He then married a young princess from Austria, linking himself to old royal blood. Soon after, a son was born. Napoleon believed his dynasty was secure. Yet his ambition continued to push him forward. In 1812, he turned his attention east, toward Russia. The Russian emperor had broken trade rules, and Napoleon decided to force obedience. He gathered the largest army Europe had ever seen, made up of soldiers from many nations. Confident in his past success, he marched into Russian land. The Russians refused to fight directly. They retreated, burning villages and fields behind them. Napoleon advanced deeper, stretching his supply lines. When battle finally came at Borodino, it was fierce and costly. Napoleon won the field but lost many men. He entered Moscow expecting surrender. Instead, the city was empty and soon caught fire. With no supplies and winter approaching, Napoleon waited, hoping for peace. It never came. Finally, he ordered retreat. The journey back was a disaster. Cold, hunger, disease, and constant attacks destroyed the army. Thousands died each day. What began as a march of power ended as a struggle for survival. Napoleon returned to France with only a fraction of his forces. His enemies sensed weakness. Nations rose against him, forming new alliances. Napoleon still fought with skill, winning some battles, but numbers and fatigue worked against him. In 1814, he was forced to give up his throne. He was sent into exile on a small island far from France. For the first time, Napoleon was powerless. Yet his story was not finished. The fire that drove him had not gone out, and Europe would soon learn that removing a crown did not erase a legend. Napoleon lived on the island of Elba as a ruler without an empire. The land was small, the people few, and the silence heavy. He walked its hills, watched the sea, and listened to reports from France. The new rulers had promised peace, but the country was restless. Old soldiers were dismissed, prices rose, and pride faded. Napoleon understood the mood even from afar. He knew France had not forgotten him. After less than a year in exile, he made his move. In early 1815, he escaped Elba with a small group of loyal men and sailed back to France. When he landed, troops were sent to stop him. Napoleon stepped forward alone and spoke to them. He reminded them of shared victories and sacrifice. The soldiers lowered their weapons and joined him. Word spread quickly, and cities opened their gates. Without firing a shot, he marched toward Paris. The king fled, and Napoleon took power again. This return became known as the 100 Days. Europe reacted with fear and anger. Old enemies reunited, determined to end him forever. Napoleon worked fast, rebuilding his army and preparing for war. He knew time was short and victory had to be decisive. In June 1815, Napoleon faced the combined forces of Britain and Prussia near a village called Waterloo. The ground was wet, the sky gray, and the outcome uncertain. Napoleon planned carefully, but mistakes were made. Delays allowed enemy forces to unite. The fighting was fierce and lasted all day. Cannon fire shook the land, and soldiers charged again and again. By evening, fresh enemy troops arrived. Napoleon's lines broke under pressure. For the first time, he faced a defeat he could not recover from. The army retreated, and hope faded. The battle ended not just a campaign, but an era. Napoleon returned to Paris knowing the end had come. Support vanished under Scourtagle. He abdicated once more, this time without illusions. There would be no return. The British took him prisoner and sent him far away, to a lonely island in the South Atlantic called St. Helena. St. Helena was harsh and remote. Surrounded by ocean and guarded closely, escape was impossible. Napoleon lived in a house exposed to wind and damp air. His health slowly declined. Once surrounded by generals and kings, he now had only a small circle of companions. He spent his days walking, dictating memories, and arguing with his guards. He spoke often of his battles, his laws, and his vision of Europe. He defended his choices and blamed others for his failures. In his mind, he was still shaping history. He believed that future generations would judge him more fairly than his enemies had. As years passed, his strength faded. Illness weakened him, and the island wore down his spirit. Yet his pride remained. He refused to see himself as defeated. He believed that ideas were stronger than armies, and that his name would survive longer than the empires that defeated him. In 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died at the age of 51. He was buried on the island far from France. At first, Europe moved on. Borders changed, kings ruled, and wars continued. But Napoleon's story did not fade. His laws remained in place across many countries. His methods of war reshaped armies. His rise showed how talent and ambition could break old systems. His fall warned how power could stretch too far. Historians argued, nations remembered, and legends grew. Years later, his remains were returned to France. Crowds gathered in silence as he was laid to rest in Paris. He had begun life as a poor boy from a small island. He became emperor, conqueror, and exile. He rose faster than any man of his time and fell just as hard. Napoleon's life was not simple victory or simple failure. It was movement, force, and will. He changed the world by refusing to accept limits. Long after the cannons fell silent, his shadow remained, stretched across history, reminding the world how far one man could go and how high ambition could carry a human life before gravity finally pulled it back to Earth. After Napoleon's death, his enemies believed his influence would slowly disappear. They thought time would weaken his name and turn him into a footnote. They were wrong. Stories about him spread across Europe and beyond. Soldiers who had marched under his command told their children about his courage and his fire. Writers argued over whether he was a hero or a tyrant. Artists painted him larger than life, crossing mountains and standing calm in storms. France itself remained divided. Some blamed him for endless war and loss. Others remembered the pride he gave the nation and the order he created from chaos. His laws continued to guide courts. Roads, schools, and systems he built still shaped daily life. Even those who opposed him used his ideas without admitting it. Across Europe, kings ruled carefully, always aware of what one ambitious man had once done. Armies copied his methods. Officers studied his battles. Governments feared sudden change and strong leaders rising from nothing. Napoleon became a lesson as much as a memory. His son, known as the King of Rome, grew up far from France. He never ruled and died young, carrying a famous name without its power. The dream of a Bonaparte empire ended quietly, not with cannon fire but with time. Yet Napoleon himself continued to live in the world's imagination. He became a symbol of ambition, showing how far discipline and belief could carry a person. He also became a warning, showing how even the greatest strength could break under its own weight. Long after his era ended, people still asked the same questions. Was he a liberator or a conqueror? A genius or a destroyer? A man of the people or a man of endless hunger? There was no single answer, and that uncertainty kept his story alive. Napoleon had once said that a man was remembered not for how he lived, but for how he was spoken of after death. In that he was right. His voice faded, his body weakened, but his name refused to rest. It moved through history like an echo, rising whenever the world faced change, ambition, or war. From a small island to the center of Europe, from student to emperor, from ruler to prisoner, his life followed no straight path. It climbed, fell, and burned brightly along the way. And even when the man was gone, the shadow of Napoleon Bonaparte continued to walk beside history, reminding the world that limits exist only until someone dares to push against them. Time moved forward, but Napoleon's presence never truly left the world. New generations who never saw him still felt his influence. In military schools, young officers studied his campaigns, tracing lines on maps the same way he once had as a boy. They learned how speed could defeat size, how timing could change fate, and how one decision could decide thousands of lives. In France, memories softened with distance. The pain of war slowly faded, while pride remained. People spoke of the years when France stood strong and feared. His image returned to public places, not as a ruler, but as a symbol. Statues were raised, books were written, and debates continued. Every side claimed a different Napoleon, yet none could fully capture him. Other nations also felt his shadow. Revolutions borrowed his language of merit and order. Leaders who rose from nothing were compared to him, whether they wished it or not. Some tried to follow his path and failed. Others learned from his mistakes and ruled with caution. His life became a measure against which ambition was judged. History did not freeze him in one form. To some, he was a builder who cleared away old corruption. To others, a storm that destroyed without mercy. The truth lived somewhere in between, shaped by time and memory. What remained certain was that he changed the direction of Europe in ways no single man had done before. Napoleon himself had believed deeply in destiny. He thought certain people were meant to act while others followed. Whether destiny chose him or he forced his way into it no longer mattered. What mattered was that he acted when others hesitated, and the world shifted because of it. Even his defeats became lessons. His fall showed that power has limits, that control cannot stretch forever, and that nature, distance, and human resistance eventually push back. His life proved that greatness and collapse can come from the same source. Centuries later, when people spoke of ambition, they still spoke his name. When leaders dreamed too boldly, warnings followed. When armies marched confidently, comparisons were drawn. Napoleon Bonaparte became more than a man. He became an idea that talent could rise above birth, an idea that could shape nations, an idea that the same fire that builds can also consume. And so his story did not end with exile or death. It continued in questions, arguments, and memories. The boy from Corsica who once felt small had grown larger than his time. His life remained a reminder that history is not only shaped by crowds or chance, but sometimes by one person who refuses to accept the world as it is and dares to reshape it, no matter the cost.